Welcome to Infidelity Truths. Before we dive into today's gripping story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more thrilling stories just for you. Let's begin. David always believed he had built a solid, secure, and above all, happy life. He woke up early every day, put on his running shoes, did his workouts, and then headed to the company he had built with his own hands. For years, he established a stable routine, surrounded by habits that gave meaning to his existence. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. His marriage to Laura was, as he believed, stable and companionate, and the presence of their two adult children reinforced that sense of fullness even more. They had gone through difficult phases, it's true, like any couple, but they always overcame them, always found a way to move forward. At least, that's what he thought until that day. That weekend seemed to be just another social commitment among many they had. James Thornton, Laura's boss, was hosting a pool party to celebrate the closing of a big contract at the company where she worked. David was never a big fan of this kind of event, but as a present husband, he decided to accompany her. After all, these occasions also served to strengthen connections, even though he preferred more private settings. They arrived, were greeted warmly, exchanged greetings, smiles, and soon mingled with the other guests. Everything was proceeding in perfect normality. While Laura was chatting with some coworkers near the buffet area, David approached the drinks table to grab something. At that moment, without noticing his presence, Ethan Thornton, James's son, was engaged in an animated conversation with two friends, laughing, talking loudly, and seeming a bit tipsy from the amount of beer he had already consumed. And it was right there that everything happened. In the middle of a random sentence, Ethan, in a spontaneous way, let slip an expression, a nickname, a word, that made David's body freeze instantly. That word, as far as he knew, only existed within the intimacy he shared with Laura. No one else used it. No one even knew about it. It was one of those things that naturally arise within a relationship, the kind that only makes sense to those who live together. Hearing it come out of Ethan's mouth so naturally, so casually, felt like getting punched in the stomach, the kind of thing that, when it happens, makes your brain desperately try to find explanations. For a few seconds, David stood motionless. He pretended to be just choosing a drink, but in reality, his mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. He tried to convince himself it could be a coincidence, that maybe he had misheard, but he hadn't. It had been clear, sharp, with no room for confusion. And if there was even the slightest chance it was just a coincidence, then why all of a sudden did everything inside him feel like it was crumbling? Why was his heart racing, his hands sweating, and his stomach churning? He took a deep breath, disguised his feelings, and tried to return to socializing as if absolutely nothing had happened. But from that moment on, the party lost all meaning. The conversations turned into noise. The laughter became distant sounds disconnected from the reality that was starting to form in his head. His eyes, once relaxed, now scanned every movement, every gesture, every exchanged look, especially between Laura and James. It was impossible not to notice details that had never caught his attention before, like how James seemed more attentive to Laura, how the two looked at each other longer than would be considered normal. Small things that, added together, began to paint an uncomfortable picture. Maybe they had always been there, out in the open, and David, blinded by trust, had never wanted to see them. Perhaps, until that moment, his mind had simply chosen not to see. He still tried, for a few moments, to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that his mind was playing tricks on him. After all, a nickname wasn't proof of anything. But deep down, the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was impossible to ignore. David spent the rest of the party observing, disguising, smiling mechanically. He analyzed every detail, every word, every touch, trying to piece together a puzzle that he didn't even know existed, or if it was being constructed by his own imagination. The drive back home was silent. Laura, calm, talked about trivial matters as if absolutely nothing was out of the ordinary. And this, in a way, made everything even stranger. Because if something was really going on, she was extremely good at hiding it. But if nothing was happening, then why did David feel like something inside him had been broken? That night, lying in bed next to Laura, he pretended to sleep. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that day, every word he heard, every expression he noticed. His mind wouldn't stop, and one thought began to become increasingly clear: he needed answers. He needed to know if he was becoming paranoid or if, in fact, he had been living a lie for much longer than he imagined. And there, in that heavy silence, he made a decision, discreet, cold, calculated. From that day on, his life would change forever. And without knowing it, that small phrase, unintentionally spoken by Ethan, had just opened a door that could never be closed again. David woke up determined. He got up earlier, got ready as if he were truly leaving for a business trip, and before leaving, double-checked that all the cameras were working perfectly. He installed each one carefully in the right spots around the house: living room, kitchen, garage, entrance, all with remote access directly on his phone. He wasn't doing it for revenge. He was doing it to protect his sanity. He needed answers. He kissed Laura, wished her a good day, said he would be back the next day, and left. She, as always, acted completely natural. She smiled, wished him a good trip, commented on how much he had been working lately, and even joked about bringing her a gift when he returned. This only reinforced the uncomfortable feeling growing inside him. But David didn't go to Charlotte. He drove a few neighborhoods away from home, parked the car on a quiet street just a few blocks away from his own house, activated the camera tracking on his phone, took a deep breath, and sat there watching everything. The morning hours passed, and surprisingly, everything seemed normal. Laura left shortly after, around 8:30, carrying her bag, wearing typical work clothes, walking calmly to her car, just as she did every day. She checked the door locks, got into the vehicle, and drove off. David confirmed on the tracker that she had indeed gone to work, and throughout the entire morning, he didn't notice anything unusual. The indoor cameras showed the house empty, with no activity. For a moment, he even questioned whether he was overreacting, whether all this insecurity made any sense. His mind tried to find any logical explanation. Maybe that thing he heard at the party really was an unfortunate coincidence. Maybe he was about to discover that, in reality, the only betrayal here was the one his own mind was playing on him. But that hope didn't last long. Around 3 in the afternoon, the app for the garage camera sent a notification. David grabbed his phone immediately, opened the live feed, and felt his stomach churn. The garage gate was opening, and the car he knew very well appeared. But that wasn't all. In the image, he clearly saw when another car stopped right behind it, James's car. They had arrived together. His wife, who supposedly had been working all day, was there, coming back home accompanied by none other than her boss. David held his breath and froze, staring at the phone screen as if it were a movie scene. But it wasn't. It was real. The woman he loved, the same one who hours earlier had kissed him goodbye and wished him a good trip, was there, getting out of the car, fixing her hair, and smiling at James as if she were simply living through something routine, habitual, without guilt, without fear, without concern. What he saw next was even worse. As soon as Laura closed the car door, James approached her, held her by the waist, and together they walked toward the house door. They didn't exchange a simple greeting. They didn't try to hide it. It was an embrace, the kind you only give to someone with whom you share intimacy, trust, and most importantly, freedom to do so without fear of being seen. The door opened, they went in together, and what David felt at that moment was as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. A mix of anger, disappointment, pain, and disbelief overwhelmed him in a way he couldn't even explain. His chest felt like it was burning, his hands trembled, his head throbbed. He stayed there for a few seconds, staring fixedly at the phone, hoping perhaps to wake up from that nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real life, cruel, shoving the truth in his face that he never imagined he'd have to confront. That was when, without thinking twice, he threw the phone onto the passenger seat, turned the key, started the car, and sped off. His heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was about to explode. The only thing repeating in his head like a mantra was, I'm going to catch them, it's over. Today, this ends. With every street he passed, his anger grew, and along with it, the certainty that this would be the day his life changed forever. David drove as if every meter he advanced was a battle against everything he was feeling. His chest felt crushed, his breathing came short, heavy, his blood boiled, and no matter how hard he tried to stay rational, every thought only fueled the pain and indignation consuming his entire body. His hands gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only way to keep from exploding. As he approached the house, thousands of images flashed through his mind. Every dinner, every trip, every declaration of love, every birthday celebration. Everything now seemed like a cruel lie. How could someone you choose to be your life partner betray you like this big, inside your own home, without the slightest sign of guilt? He slowed down a few streets before. He didn't want to draw attention. He took a deep breath, looked at his own house, and realized their cars were still there, exactly as he had seen on the cameras. Then he pulled over on the side street, got out, adjusted his clothes, and walked decisively, without hesitating for a second.
As he approached the door, he noticed it was unlocked, and that, in a way, made everything even clearer. They were so confident, so sure they were free to do whatever they wanted, that they didn't even bother to lock it. He pushed the handle and entered. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the scene he witnessed etched itself into his memory in a way he would never forget. James and Laura were in the living room, sitting on the couch, extremely close, laughing, talking, her hand on his leg while he held her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When they heard the sound of the door, they both turned at the same time. And the silence that followed was absolute. Laura's smile faded as if someone had turned off a light. She went completely pale, frozen, as if her body had been suspended in time. James, on the other hand, pulled back a few inches but tried for a few seconds to maintain his composure, as if there were still room to pretend this wasn't what it really seemed to be. David stood still, staring directly into their eyes, breathing heavily, his jaw clenched. The anger, which until then seemed about to explode, gave way to something even more powerful: absolute control. Because at that moment, he realized there was no longer anything that could be said or done to change what was happening. The truth was there, blatant, dirty, cruel. Laura tried to stand up, but his voice cut through the air like a blade, without shouting, without raising his tone, just firm, heavy, surgical. He said there was no point in pretending, no point in explaining. He knew everything. He knew about the meetings, the hugs, the hidden touches, the lies, the cheap excuses, and that from that moment on, she was no longer his wife. James was left speechless. He swallowed hard, lowered his gaze, with nothing to say. For a few seconds, he tried to get up too, as if wanting to minimize, justify, but as soon as David raised his hand, signaling for silence, he sat back down without even arguing. Laura began to stammer disjointed excuses. She tried to say it was a mistake, that it wasn't what it seemed, that it was just a moment of weakness, but every word she spoke sounded emptier, more pathetic, more ridiculous. David interrupted her mid-sentence, and made it clear he didn't want to hear anything. He said he had spent too much time listening to lies, believing false stories, trusting someone who didn't deserve it. Without wasting any more time, he went straight upstairs to the bedroom, grabbed some personal belongings, documents, his laptop, items he needed, and came back down. As he packed his things, he could see out of the corner of his eye Laura sitting on the couch, hunched over, holding her head in her hands, as if she had been hit by a truck. And in fact she had been. With everything in hand, he walked to the door, looked at her one last time, and said dryly that in the coming days she would receive news from the lawyer, and that from that moment on, they were nothing to each other. That she could, if she wanted, stay with James. After all, that was all they had now, each other and their own shame. He left, slammed the door, and walked away. His chest felt like it was tearing apart from the inside. He didn't know if it hurt more because of the betrayal, the size of the lie, or the realization that the person he had loved the most in life simply didn't exist. What existed was a character, an actress who had pretended for years to be something she never was. On the way he called his lawyer, explained the situation, and told her about the evidence he had, the videos, the photos, the camera recordings. She, experienced in cases like this, was direct. She said that with all of that in hand, he not only had full rights to the house but also had no financial obligation to Laura. And considering there were no minor children, The process would be quick, straightforward, and practically uncontested. In the following days, he took care of every detail. The lawyer handled everything with precision. The documents were prepared, the evidence was attached. When Laura received the notification, she had no way to question it. It was impossible to deny the reality that was all recorded on video, audio, and photo. The divorce process was one of the fastest that law office had ever seen. David kept the house, the cars, the company, and all the assets. She left with only what was strictly personal. No alimony, no settlement, no room for negotiation. And ironically, even James, who might have imagined that by having Laura he would also gain a comfortable life, discovered that along with the woman, he had inherited all her responsibilities and problems. But the consequences didn't stop there. The story, which could have remained confined to a small circle, leaked. And when it leaked, it exploded in a way no one had imagined. Business partners began cutting ties with James. Companies that until then had maintained solid contracts with him began to pull back. Internal investigations were opened, questions arose, suspicions about other unethical behavior surfaced, and in a short time his reputation, built over decades, crumbled like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. The invitations to events disappeared. The smiles and pats on the back vanished. The same people who had once praised, admired, and flattered him now pretended they didn't even know him. The truth is that in the business world, reputation is worth more than any contract, and James learned that the hardest way possible. Laura, who for years had lived surrounded by social circles, parties, trips, and appearances, found herself alone. Friends distanced themselves, acquaintances stopped responding to messages. The perfect life she had been so eager to flaunt simply evaporated. Meanwhile, David, even carrying the scars of that chapter of his life, looked ahead, focused on rebuilding his own story in his own way at his own pace, and most importantly, far from any lies. Because at that moment, he had already understood one of life's greatest truths. Sometimes, losing someone isn't defeat, it's liberation.